Hello! These are my favorite comics of 2019. They're not presented in any particular order. They're just some comics that I enjoyed. We're gonna start with Immortal Hulk. This is honestly probably no surprise to a lot of you if any other like comic book talky boys have been making like favorite lists or favorite comic videos. Immortal Hulk is probably on there. It might have been on there last year too. This book has basically been universally praised by everyone, and that's for good reason. This book is fucking great. Issue 26 specifically, what I'm talking about, came out late into the year, but it is a solid contender for my favorite issue, like single issue of this entire year, which this is the only single issue that I'm talking about out of the other four that I have. The rest of them are just like book titles, which are multiple issues. All right, so what happens in this book? For a little context, this is right after the Hulk and company have taken down Shadowbase, which has sort of been the shadowy organization that's been trying to kill the Hulk or make the Hulk like a bad boy or something the whole time. And throughout this book, Shadowbase, along with a lot of Devil Hulk's musings and monologues, has started to show Bruce Banner a side of humanity that he hasn't really considered or come to terms with yet. And that all comes to a big tipping point in issue 26, which is directly after Hulk has taken over Shadowbase and like basically eliminated it as a threat. In issue 26, Bruce basically declares war on humanity by saying that humanity needs to end to save humanity. You know, it's a classic villain trope, but it works here because it has been built up to for 25 issues before it, and it makes sense. And it's such a cool progression of the Bruce Banner character. Along with the slow build-up over the like past year to 2 years in this book that we've seen to changes, you know, Bruce's ideology and how he views the world, the monologue that he gives is executed in such a different way to how we usually see this trope portrayed. Like, take Ultron, for example. Ultron's musings about needing to kill the world to make the world better always comes across as sort of a sociopathic wet dream, just like, robots are better, or humans suck, this is just the conclusion I've come to. Where Bruce's monologue comes across more as like, these are the facts. This is what happens. This is the way I see the world, and it's gotta happen. And he's not very much like, fuck all of you. He's like, this sucks. We failed. Sorry, guys. Let's move on. Like, it's not... It is just... It's subtle in its difference, but it works. The monologue is also intercut with scenes of Amadeus Cho talking to Bruce Banner in a diner, and this works on a lot of levels. The first one just being that Amadeus Cho is acting as a vessel for us, the reader, thinking that, you know, Bruce is crazy here. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, Bruce Banner is warring on humanity. Not the Hulk. Bruce Banner is declaring war on humanity. That's crazy. Amadeus Cho is saying that. He's like, dude, what are you doing? And he's like, Bruce is explaining these things to Amadeus, and Amadeus is horrified. He's so scared. But what this does, in effect, is by bringing a character from Bruce's past that really knows Bruce, it shows just how much Bruce Banner has fundamentally changed over the course of the Immortal Hulk. By, you know, bringing someone who hasn't been in the Immortal Hulk, really, shoving him back in here, he knows a Bruce that is different, that is pre-Immortal Hulk, pre all of the Shadow-based nonsense. And Bruce is talking like this, and Amadeus is like, whoa, you're not the same Bruce I used to know. The whole issue comes to a head with a different monologue by a different character, Dario Agger, or the Minotaur. He's a big Minotaur now. He doesn't keep that a secret anymore. He's the Minotaur. He is the leader of Roxxon, which is Marvel's favorite stand-in for just every corrupt corporation, capitalism entity in our world. And his monologue works really well because it exemplifies and proves basically everything that Bruce is saying about humanity and the state of the world. Bruce's thesis is basically that the top of the world, like the most powerful people, are corrupt, and there is like the system is inherently flawed because the people on top cannot be taken down. Whatever they do, they will never be taken down, which it's kind of the same way in our world, but I don't want to think about it. A big thing that Agger is talking about here is that we're hot off the heels of War of the Realms, where the Minotaur, Dario Agger, was very publicly siding with the elves. Roxxon as well. Very clearly publicly siding with the elves in the war to terraform the Earth into a Norse clusterfuck, but nobody cared. Like, Agar says that himself, like, nobody important cared. So Roxxon didn't change. Their stock went down a little bit, there were some articles written about them, but other than that, no one gave a shit, and they're still chugging along just as good as they were before. Roxxon didn't take a detrimental hit because humanity is so beyond fixing at this point that the powerful will do whatever they can to stay on top, and society will just allow it. So that's what Bruce is trying to say, why humanity needs fixing, and that's what Dario Agger is confirming by being that, and trying to exercise that in a way, like, utilize it in a way that will keep him on top and keep him big and strong and powerful. This idea is compounded upon in the next two issues, which are the only other issues of Immortal Hulk out at the time that I'm filming this, where Agger is sort of blowing back on Bruce and Hulk, trying to take Hulk out, because, you know, Bruce is basically warring on Roxxon in a tangential way, so Roxxon is trying to take the Hulk out, but the Hulk's like, no, fuck you, dude, and it's really fun, because Dario Agger's speech in this issue is talking all about how nothing will be able to stop them, because nothing has stopped them before, like, even going so much as to betray Earth and to fucking alien elves. But now the Hulk is coming here, who has declared war on humanity and exactly the type of person that Dario Agger and Roxxon is, and he beats the shit out of them. What started a year ago as sort of a monster horror movie book has now turned into a deeper, like, political thriller, which I know isn't for everyone, but I'm really fucking enjoying it. Like, I've never been more excited for this book. Each issue has been really stellar in its own right, but this is like the highest I've ever been interested in the actual plot. Like, the writing and the intrigue of each issue before this has been great, but I wasn't ever super, like, hooked on what's actually happening. But now I'm fucking in. Like, I'm so interested in this. And I'm really interested in the inevitable, please have it happen in the best way possible, big event where the Avengers fight the Hulk. That has to be on Marvel's radar at this point. I know I think in this issue, in issue 26, or maybe an issue before, somebody interviews Iron Man, interviews Tony Stark, and he's like, we're looking into it, in reference to the Hulk problem, Bruce Banner warring on humanity. So I would be very cool with that being the summer event, where the Avengers try to take down the Hulk for doing all this shit. You know, you could sell a lot of comic books about that. I would also just be cool with it being an Avengers standoff type thing, where it's just a crossover between the Hulk and the Immortal Hulk and the Avengers book. That would be cool too. Like Jason Aaron and Al Ewing working on a fucking crossover like that. That sounds great. You can make it small scale. I just want it to happen, is all I'm saying. Even if it just happens in the Immortal Hulk. Like, there was an issue last year where the Avengers do show up and try to contain the Hulk, and I think they sort of get him. I don't remember. It was a long time ago. At that point, though, like, not even everyone knew that the Hulk was alive at this point. The Avengers were just trying to stop a threat before it becomes a threat. But now Bruce Banner is very publicly back and very publicly a problem. So yeah, the Avengers are gonna have to come back in a big way and deal with this shit. If you haven't been reading The Immortal Hulk, fucking read it. It's so good. Just check it out. It's a good time. Start from the beginning if you want to, or just jump on from 26. It's a pretty good jumping on point. All right, next book, Strike Force. This shit's great. I don't understand, like, this book came out of fucking nowhere. It came out of left goddamn field. As far as I know, Strike Force is not if it is a team that's been done before, like the Defenders or something, it's not been around for a long time. This is a really good book. It's a team book that doesn't really spin out of anything, just comes out of nowhere, and it's really well written and really interesting. Okay, so there's one reason why this book got onto my radar, aside from it just being a new Marvel book that was announced. Jessica Drew is in it. Spider-Woman, who's my favorite superhero. Yeah, admittedly, I'm going to like this book a little more than most books because she's in it, and her portrayal in it is great. But, like, aside from that, like, pushing that aside, this book is just straight up a good time. Like, I really enjoy it, even aside from the Spider-Woman in the room. So, Strike Force here, the premise here is that this is kind of the Black Ops version of the Avengers, sort of like the X-Men have the X-Force, but the way that the team comes together through circumstance and coincidence, instead of just Captain America like giving an order that we need a Black Ops team or something, is kind of what sells this book and propels this book into intrigue here. Let me explain a little bit, starting with the team composition. In the first issue, the team seems to be kind of a random assortment of heroes. You've got Spectrum, Wiccan, Winter Soldier, Spider-Woman. I think that's all of the initial group. And then they're shortly joined by Blade and Damon Hellstrom. But, that's a weird group. Like, they don't really have that much connection. And that's a lot of the intrigue that goes into this. Like, why is this group together? And they show up, like, by coincidence, sort of. I'll explain a bit about the main villain of the book, the Verdai. I'll talk about them in a second. But right off the bat, you're like, okay, this team obviously is going to have some kind of a connection, but it's not very apparent, and that's cool. That's a fun little mystery to follow throughout the book. There is, in issue 4, a really cool in-canon explanation for why the team gets together. They each, well, a lot of them, not all of them, they each have a flashback to a time in their past where they have encountered a Verdai, and they're like, oh, that's why we're together. The Verdai got us together because we've encountered them in the past. But then Blade comes along and shoots that idea down by saying, oh, those memories were implanted. You never met the Verdai because the Verdai haven't been on Earth in large numbers up until the Black Bifrost was blown up or created or whatever. After War of the Realms, they showed up. That's why this book happens. The Verdai come out because of War of the Realms, which, let's talk a little bit more about the Verdai. The Verdai are a really cool device. Just a good villain in this. They're a group of dark elves, like a sect of dark elves that can shapeshift, like in a very specific way. They have to have captured the person that they're going to shapeshift into before they can actually do it. So they're sort of like Skrulls, but with a more Norse and like organic theming to them. They're cool. I like them. And it works on a deeper level because they're hidden. No one really knows about them. They're like a gross like sect on Svartalfheim that, the Dark Elves don't really want to talk about. And they're in the shadows here on Earth to do whatever it is they're trying to do. That's not really clear. That's one criticism I have about this book, is the Verdai's motives aren't very clear. They're doing what they gotta do in the shadows, and knowing about them, like Blade talks about, knowing about them is a curse in and of itself. Like, when Blade first encounters a Verdai, it drives him insane. He's like, what the fuck was that? And it's like poisoning his brain until he figures out what the hell these guys are. So Blade, once he realizes that these group of heroes has been captured and changed and framed by the Verdai, makes the executive call to go under the Avengers' noses and take all these guys out and be like, all right, here's the deal. We're not going to tell the Avengers, because if we tell the Avengers, they're all going to get fucked up and taken by the Verdai or go insane trying to look for them. It's cool to have a Black Ops team that isn't formed by Captain America going to Blade and being like, hey, Blade, your stories are generally darker than the Avengers stories. Why don't you go and form a Black Ops team to deal with the shit that we can't put into our PG-13 comic books? You know what I mean? Like, they could have just done that. They opened the book with like, all right, Blade, it's time for Marvel to put out a new team book that is tangentially related to the Avengers. Instead, it's a really interesting premise that makes sense why it would be a more Black Ops team. And after this story arc, when they're done with the Verdai, they might, like, go back to Cap, or who I think, is it Cap? It's either Captain Marvel or Captain America that's leading the Avengers. Or no, it's Black Panther. He's the chairman of the Avengers. They'll go to someone and they'll be like, hey, we like this team. Some of them will leave, I'm sure, like happened in New Avengers a long time ago. Some of them will leave, and whoever stays will actually become, like, the Black Ops Avengers team will become Strike Force. And then they'll be sent out on missions. But, starting this first story arc is really important to not have it be just hokey and like, here's the thing, here's a new team, go for it. Yeah, overall this book is great. From the really good writing to the Spider-Woman to the just Norse shit. I really like Norse mythology, so that's good. Put that in your book and I'll like it. I really hope that this book survives Marvel's on high mandate to cancel fucking anything before it really hits its stride. And I'm hoping this book will survive, because I have been seeing a lot of, on the covers, they've been putting like quotes that are like, this book is great, which they've been doing for Immortal Hulk as well, which, if critics like it, that probably means that it's selling well, Like, if critics like it enough to where they're putting it on, like, quotes on the book, it's probably selling enough to make it keep going, to warrant, like, its stay, which, that's a big deal for a book called Strike Force with a bunch of characters you don't care about. So, it's in danger, I would say, but I really hope it continues, because there is a lot that you can do with this book, and I am very excited to see where it goes. Okay, DCeased. The fuck? What even was this book? Who let Tom Taylor waltz into the DC office and say, hey, I want to write a zombie apocalypse story in the DC universe set in current year? Like, and above that, who fucking approved it? Like, this book is just a straight up zombie apocalypse story, but it has no right to be as good as it is. This book is great. This book defies all odds, and it's just like, hey, we're gonna write the most contrived premise, and it's just gonna be phenomenal. DCeased is a quiet, masterfully written, alternate universe, Elseworlds, whatever you want to call it, story that hits the mark really well. I am a huge fan of Elseworlds or what if stories, and that's for the specific reason of that I really like mythologizing things. That word sucks. In so much as, you know, like taking parts of a universe, parts of a mythology, like Norse mythology or the DC or Marvel universe, taking a snapshot of that and then adapting it or injecting a different catalyst or premise into it in some way. That's why I love adaptations of Norse mythology. That's why I love alternate universe stuff. So in this case, you take a snapshot of the DC universe, without all the gunk, without all the mess. So, you know, you take the DC universe of 2018, 2019, dust it off a little bit to make it a little simpler, the status quo a little simpler, and inject a new catalyst in it. In this case, we have Darkseid finding the anti-life equation and deploying it as a technovirus that turns everyone into zombies. I actually initially criticized this book in issue 1 for being a little too heavy-handed, ham-fisted about the technology bad message because of this, because the anti-life equation is, you know, if you look at a screen, you'll turn into a zombie. That's a little ham-fisted, but that idea, like the idea of the zombie thing is kind of like thrown out in issue 2. Like, it's obviously still about zombies the whole time, but they don't continue to hit you over the head with technology bad throughout the whole series. It's really just in issue 1, so forgive it for that. But it is pretty bad in issue 1. I really like that you can feel the hopelessness in this book, and that only works because it is an Elseworlds story. If this were in current continuity, like if there were a big event, like Blackest Night, Darkest Night? No, it's Blackest Night, right? I don't know. If it were that, or if it were just another crisis, you'd be like, oh, we're gonna get through this just fine. Maybe a character will die. If it's a big character, they'll be back in a couple years. Like, but here, in an Elseworlds, in an alternate universe, you can do whatever the hell you want. And Tom Taylor knows it. And Tom Taylor is good at that shit. Green Arrow and Mockingbird can kill Green Lantern, and then Mockingbird can subsequently become the next Green Lantern. Poison Ivy can quarantine Gotham with all of her flowery friends and just basically keep her and Harley Quinn in there. Batman can be shot and killed by Alfred after he gets infected with the virus. You can do all of that because it doesn't matter. It's over there. And that is what makes alternate universe and what if stories so interesting to me, because you get to see these ideas that you just couldn't do in the main universe because we have to keep telling Batman stories forever. He can't ever die. He can't ever get old. He can't have kids. Spider-Man can't be married. No. He'll be too old at that point. But you can have that over there. And that really makes compelling stories to me. And the book isn't just a sequence of these like cool, crazy alternate universe events. Like, it's not just like, whoa. It can also be really fucking clever. Like, there is this series of panels that I tweeted about in one of the issues where Lex Luthor confronts Superman, or they're not really confronting each other, but they meet. And Lex Luthor throws all hubris aside, all arrogance, all ego aside, and just kneels before Superman, looks up at him, and says, look what they did to our city. This is after Metropolis had been wiped out by something. Big bomb. And that moment is just so quiet and so perfect in the chaos that is the DCeased universe at this moment. And it's great. And there is so much more of that heart in this book. It's just really well written and really smart and really nice. And like that series of panels is so good. And that is exemplified throughout the whole series. Like this book about a zombie apocalypse in the DC universe also is just like this touching and heartwarming. Like that's Tom Taylor. That's his shit. He's doing it at his best here, and it's really good. This book is great. Also, rarely it has kind of an ending, which is weird. in the state of things with comic books, how I talked about how we got to keep telling stories forever. This book ends. It's open enough to where you can tell sequels, which they will because this book sold like fucking crazy. But if you just pick up DCeased as a trade and you're like, cool, here's a little alternate universe, Elseworlds, a DC story about zombies, and you end up getting something that is way more than you bargained for, and it's got a nice ending, and that's all you need. Like, it caps off well, and I am excited for the future of this book, because there will be a future of this book, because DC will follow the trail of money, but I would be very okay if it just ended here. Like, I would be cool with that. This is a very nice, self-contained story. Speaking of very nice, self-contained stories, we're going to do the opposite of that. House of X and Powers of 10. Yeah, apparently it's Powers of 10, which makes sense in the context of the story, but I'm tired of X being to stop. So many fucking things have done that. I'm tired of Roman numerals, get them out of here. I'm a massive fan of Jonathan Hickman's writing, and I think that's because he really excels in one of the two main things that I like about my fiction, that being continuity and mythology, which I've kind of hit on before this in the last couple things, but Jonathan Hickman really excels in continuity. I'm not saying like continuity in the sense of, the whole Marvel universe or the whole whatever universe. I'm saying continuity in the sense of he sets long-term things up and he delivers on them. He's really good at setup and payoff. Like, he did it with Avengers, the New Avengers, he did it with Fantastic Four. That's his writing style. He's also really good at mythology stuff, mythologizing things. Like, not as much as some other writers, like Donny Cates and Jason Aaron are really fucking good at that stuff. But Hickman is really good at continuity, like setting up long-term plans, sowing the seeds for things, and then paying them off. A big part of that is Marvel lets him take the time to pay those off, and it doesn't take him for fucking ever. Tom, what's weird about this is I don't really like the X-Men, so it's strange that Hawks and Pox here are on my essentially top 5 list of comics this year. I don't really like the X-Men. The only X-Men character I really like is Laura Kinney, with a few others. I follow her everywhere, except for Fallen Angels, because it's not that great. But we're talking about Hawks and Pox. So yeah, like, coming from me, a guy who doesn't ever really read X-Men stuff, saying that House of X and Powers of 10 are, like, some of the best comics out there this year, like, that's a shining review. For a long time, the X continuity has kind of been all over the place, and that's one of the reasons I wasn't really following it, because there wasn't a lot of cohesion, things weren't really changing. In a world where the X-Men are kind of already their own pocket universe inside of Marvel, you kind of want it to be cohesive in a sense, because they are all sort of under this sub-banner. Like, you want the Avengers world to make sense, you want the Spider world to make sense among each other. Overall, you would like the whole Marvel universe to make sense, but that's never gonna happen because I don't fucking know. There's no big guy and editor-in-chief. There's too many Marvel books, I guess. I don't know. That shit all changed because Jonathan Hickman walked into Marvel and said, this shit's fuck all that. Cancel everything. Give it all to me, this boy, and I'll change the game. And he did. Marvel let him. They canceled all of the X books, I'm pretty sure every single X book, and gave him 12 issues to set a new status quo for the entire X-Men universe. And he did it, and it's great. So what is that new status quo? Basically, from some not quite time travel shenanigans, Professor X and Magneto have teamed up and decided that mutants just need to be separated from humanity, but in a more civil way. So they go to this mutant/sentient island called Krakoa that has flora on it that is beneficial to humans, and they use that flora as a bargaining chip to get sovereignty for the mutant population on Krakoa and Krakoa's various spots around the world, so that the mutant population basically just becomes its own thing, and it is seen as beneficial towards humanity because they are supplying humanity with flowers that will basically cure all illnesses. Along with this premise are just a lot of just cool ideas that come with Krakoa's existence and just things that are set up in Hawks and Pox. You have, like, the Five, who are a group of these 5 mutants who, with their powers combined, can revive pretty much any mutant. That's really cool. You have the Quiet Council, which is made up of heroes and villains from very different walks of life that are, like, kind of like the Senate of Krakoa and the mutant population. That's really cool too. There's the Hellfire Corporation, which is touched on a lot in Marauders, which is maybe a little bit of the seedier underbelly of Krakoa, and it is the place that exports all of the Krakoan flora and the drugs and stuff. That's also just, there's a lot of really cool ideas that you can play with for years to come that are set up in Hawks and Pox. These 12 issues, they not only tell a really beautifully well-written story about Moira and Professor X, but they set up a status quo for the X-Men that hopefully will be written about and compounded upon for the next few years at least. Like, I would like to see this go for 3 years minimum. And I know that sounds like a really long time, but, like, New Avengers and Avengers, that was the status quo for the Avengers for, I think, like 3 or 4 years as well. So, you know, let it breathe. Like, let's see this concept through. Let's not cut it short. Like, with a status quo shift this massive for this big of a part of the Marvel Universe, it would be so unsatisfying to see it go away in like a year. Like, you know, all the miniseries that are happening currently come to a close, and there's a big Avengers versus X-Men event. The X-Men are disassembled, blah, blah, blah. Something happens, like House of M happens again or something. Like, that would suck. Like, we don't want that. Let this concept breathe. There's so much to play with. Just like Immortal Hulk, like, there's so many places the book can go, just the books in general that are in Dawn of X can go, that I really, really want to see this concept flourish. I will say, one thing I truly hate about Hawks and Pox is that they are split into two different books. Hickman did this back in New Avengers and Avengers, where it was one larger story being told, split into 2 different books. But it worked there because you didn't need one book to understand the other. If you were reading New Avengers and Avengers at the same time, you would be like, oh, okay, I see how they connect, but, you know, you don't have to read Avengers 12 to understand what's happening in New Avengers 13. That is until Time Runs Out happens, but that was kind of the they came together at the end. That was more of a crossover than it was just the entire book. But you physically cannot understand House of X if you don't read Powers of 10 and vice versa. This is kind of a moot point because in the future, I'm sure people will read the trade that just has them compiled together and laid out. And as far as I can tell, Marvel isn't making singular trades for House of X and Powers of 10 individually. There is just the one that has all 12 issues, which I think is a good move. It might be a little on the pricey side, but I just don't want people to go into a comic book store, pick up House of X, read it, and be like, that was fucking garbage. I don't know what's going on. Because they have half of the issues and it's not just like you read 1 through 6 of House of X and then you read 1 through 6 of Powers of 10. You have to read you have to go 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 4. Like, it's just like, you have to flip flop between them. I just wish stories weren't told like that. I hate that in any comic where like a crossover is told like, part 1 is in this book and part 2 is in this other book, part 3 is in, I hate that. Just tell like one title, books all the way through. They do it a lot in events, and I hate that. Just one book. Go through it. But yeah, Hawks and Pox, really great. Check it out if you want. I think it's a really good jumping on point for the X-Men, especially coming from someone who really didn't read anything X-Men, especially the main X-Men books. Never really read them. But now I'm reading like X-Men, the normal X-Men book, X-Force, Marauders. There's a lot of Dawn of X books that I'm really enjoying because of this premise. Okay, Spider-Man Life Story. This book, again, you're probably not surprised about this one. This comic is so good. It is so brilliant in its premise. It is so touching in its writing. It is a timeless classic, like, immediately. It is a love letter to Spider-Man's continuity. It is a love letter to Spider-Man as a whole. It's a love letter to Marvel. It's just, Zdarsky and Bagley hit it out of the goddamn park with this book. Like, it is an evergreen, self-contained story that I really, really hope people will not forget about anytime soon. Spider-Man Life Story is so good. For those that don't know, this book originally started as a pitch from Zdarsky to tell an alternate universe of the Marvel world where time progressed normally since the superhero boom in the 60s, where, you know, people grew up as they would. So if Peter Parker is 20 in 1970 or whatever, in 2000 he would be 50. But yeah, originally it was supposed to be about the whole Marvel universe, but the pitch was narrowed down into just being Spider-Man. It's the same world, but it's told through Spider-Man's lens. And I think that really works here. I'm kind of glad they did it. I think it would have been a little messier if they did it through Marvel. I kind of want to see that now, or at least like, you know, like we see Iron Man life story or Captain America life story. I think that would be really cool. The best part about this premise is how the continuity is dealt with. Everything that happened in 616 happened in this universe. It's happening like at an age appropriate time. So like, you know, when Peter is dealing with the Clone Wars in the 90s, he's not just, you know, young 20-year-old still. He's like 40. So he's dealing with that at a much older age. And not only is time progressing normally as these events are happening, the events are like just sort of how I mentioned with DCeased, where you take a snapshot of the continuity and condense it, like brush away the shit that didn't work and make it work better and make more sense. Because now you have hindsight, you can make everything work better. That is executed perfectly here. There are changes, there is new stuff, like, for example, when Peter comes back from the Secret Wars all clad in black, Aunt May has dementia and is on her deathbed, like she finna die soon, and Mary Jane is pregnant with kids. Like, these are changes, these are things that didn't happen in 616, but they work, because it would make more sense for Peter's life to be in a different place because he's older when these things are happening. And you know, I kind of find myself having a hard time talking about this comic in more detail just because there's so much shit going on in each issue. Like, each issue takes a look at a specific part in like a decade of Peter's life. Some like are more sprawling where there's a lot more going on. Some are focusing on a very specific part. There's a lot happening. And it's really good. This comic kind of deserves its own video where you just, you know, we can talk more in depth about each issue, because it is so, I don't want to say congested because that's sort of a negative term, but or bloated, but there's a lot happening and it's dealt with really well. And that makes sense because you're condensing fucking like 60 odd years of Spider-Man continuity into a 6-issue miniseries where each issue deals with 10 years. Like, things are gonna feel messy, but somehow they don't because they are so expertly dealt with and organized in such a way that is really well executed. I can't begin to fathom the amount of work that went into condensing Spider-Man's timeline into what we see here. It's so well done. Like, I have some things that I'm working on where I might be dealing with similar themes, and it's hard. It's like, you know, you take specific important parts from Peter's life and you throw the shit away that you don't care about. You just say, it didn't happen. Or, you know, it happened this way in my world. And you could say that and people wouldn't be mad, but Zdarsky didn't take the easy way out. He took it with like brunt force. He was like, yeah, fucking, it all happened. It's just he was 40 when it happened. Like, there is a different version of this book where Zdarsky did take the easy way out, and he was just like, in the first issue happens normally. Like, up until he graduates college, everything plays out like it did in 616. But after he graduates college, things start to progress differently because of the butterfly effect of Peter aging rapidly, or not rapidly, but normally as time goes on instead of him doing Marvel time. You could have done that, and it probably would have been a fun story, but I don't think it would have been as good, especially to comic book fans who know all of this shit. Also, the covers are really pretty here. Zdarsky, I read an interview with him or something where he was talking about how he fought for these covers. He did the covers. He fought for them because he wanted to do them in this specific way that looks very different from like a classic Marvel cover. And it works really well. It makes this book stand apart. It matches the tone really well. I mean, the only thing you could criticize about them is that the cover art doesn't match the interior, but that happens all the time. I sort of don't like that. but when the covers are this pretty, like, I kind of can't complain. I think a lot of people might have missed out on Spider-Man Life Story. I think a lot of the other books that I've talked about, except maybe Strike Force, people read because they were big, interesting events. Like Immortal Hulk has been lauded as a really good book for at least a year now. Hawks and Pox, there's a lot of X-Men fans, and it was a pretty big marketable thing. DCeased, it's a zombie book, so people are going to read that regardless. Strike Force was like really the only one that people might not have known about, but also this, like, it's a Spider-Man book, but it's a Spider-Man book it's in an AU. It's got kind of a funky premise, and I really hope that if any of you are listening that haven't read it, please go read it, because it, out of probably all of the books that I've mentioned here, is just so self-contained and so evergreen, like I've mentioned, that you can just read it, and it's great. And I think the trade is out, so go check it out. It's a really good ride. It's a really good book. If I leave you with anything, go fucking buy Spider-Man Life Story. So those are my, like, top 5 favorite comics. Again, in no particular order. Just books I liked this year. Some honorable mentions. I really liked Venom this year. War of the Realms was really good. A nice conclusion to Jason Aaron's fucking epic Thor run. He's actually done now King Thor, which was his actual conclusion, I guess. It just wrapped up. I haven't read the 4th issue while I'm recording this, but it's King Thor has also been really good. There's also Doomsday Clock issue 10, which just specifically issue 10. I have a lot of problems with Doomsday Clock, but issue 10 is really fucking good. It's such a cool, it's playing with continuity. It's a really cool issue, just showing Dr. Manhattan traveling through the DC universe and time and stuff, and being fucky with Superman. It's a good time. I really like that book. There's also a Daredevil miniseries called Man Without Fear that I read, that I just read, just issue 1 came out, I was like, yeah, I'll try this, and it surprised me. It was really fun. It's a cool exploration of the Daredevil character. I really like Daredevil. I generally don't read Daredevil books when they're out, but I read that one and it was great. So yeah, check that out as well. I want to know what you guys think about your favorite comics. Did you see that coming? I imagine a lot of you have read the comics that I've talked about. There's not a lot of, like, sleeper, like, indie hits here. I'm a Marvel and DC. I'm a superhero boy. I read indie books, but not often. So yeah, a lot of these were, like, big popcorn books, but some of them are really surprising, like DCeased and Strike Force, coming out of nowhere, just being good shit. So check them out. I think a lot of these people read just on merit of, like, word of mouth of, like, damn, this book is really good. You should check it out. I don't know what else to say. Support your local comic book shop. Go buy the Spider-Man Life Story trade. DC's trade is probably also out. Immortal Hulk, go buy the floppy for $26. Strike Force, the first arc's not even done, so go buy the floppies for that, I guess. What else did I talk about? Is that all of them? Oh, Hawks and Pox. That trade isn't out yet, but it'll be out soon. So check it out. Bye-bye!